Hangout is live.
We're
All right,
live.
we are live with Savage Tim. We are, of course, doing our comedy episode today. Let's talk about the fun of Tim's ETU campaign. Has there been any comedy going on in there, Tim?
Yeah, a little bit. It's been a little bit of a more lighthearted setting than we've done in the past. I had told my players kind of expect that. I didn't want to play things ttoo grimdark. The feel of the tone we were looking for was somewhere between classic X-Files, Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Scooby-Doo. That sort of very loose kind of very. It should be fun. It should be funny. There should be moments of things where things are kind of frightening. But it's definitely not a straightforward setting. At least I'm not really playing it that way. I mean, come on, we're talking about the same guys who brought us, Red Necromancer is one of the one sheets available for this. I
Mhm.
mean, they're not taking this seriously. These are the guys who wrote Chickens in the Mist, which is a terrific meat grinder of a scenario that involves giant mutant chickens. I'm not kidding. This is what you're looking at. This is what you're getting involved with, and you'll play a 12 to midnight game. Um, so yeah, I don't think you could really take it seriously. I don't think I'd want to either.
So is this more of a beer and pretzels game, one where it's a little bit let the hair down and have a little bit more fun,
Exactly,
and,
exactly.
and bless the dice and remove the cursed dice from the
Right,
table?
right. And that's one of the things I've never really run games that are very serious in playtime. I mean, a lot of it has to do with what your goal is during a session. And I think that a lot of people have a goal of, well, we want to tell a great story. We want to have full involvement. We want to be really immersed in the action. And I'm more sort of a more casual player. And the game is an excuse for me to hang out with my friends and tell stories and have a good time, but it's not really all that serious. I wouldn't want it to be all that serious.
Hmm. So, what advice would you give for people for handling comedy in there when things start to get goofy? Should they run with it? Should they hold it to a reason? I mean, what is the good rule of thumb for this
I
kind of
think
for table shenanigans?
I think it really does come to what kind of feel and theme are you going for. Like I said, in the case of ETU, I mean there are horror elements, but it still should be more adventurous and lighthearted. On the other hand, if I were running something like Call of Cthulhu, I would definitely put a stronger hold on, or I would definitely keep stronger control on the amount of comedy that's happening at the table, because you want people to be a little bit more immersed in the action. You want them to feel more of that fear and that terror. We've talked about that before, about ways you can do that, and you want to kind of avoid it too, because that's one of the reasons why you want to avoid comedy as well, because that's going to interfere with that flow. That's not to say that comedy doesn't have its place. I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time is The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing
Hmm.
from the early 80s. And that has got some of the funniest lines in it. It's got some terrific jokes that are paced at just the right point to break the tension. It's that balance point between a scream and a laugh is right where those are going to happen. Either the character is going to scream their head off, they're going to scream bloody murder, or they're going to laugh their heads off.
So
So
if you're GMing the thing and a player says one of those great lines and things, do you reward him with a Benny in that?
Oh, totally. As long as it's appropriate. You know, if they're trying to do something that's going to lend itself to the story or lend itself to the atmosphere that we're trying to create, that's something you definitely want to reward, and that's going to give you more of positive feedback from the players, because you're rewarding them directly for something that they're doing to help the rest of the people get involved.
But do you make the differentiation between if it's in character or out of character? Because I always
Certainly.
say, got to keep it in character, got to keep it in character for the Benny.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know if I'd go that far. It depends on the situation. I think that it tends to be more in character play that winds up with those sort of lines. It's not really that a lot of out of character knowledge or influence that will do that. But yeah, so I don't really. It's not really usually a problem as
Hmm.
far as I've seen.
Are there any other mechanics in the Savage Worlds toolbox that lends itself to managing this or rewarding this type of play, or even allow feeds to comedy?
Oh yeah. Well, one of the rules that I've used in the past is I actually used it for a Savage Ghostbusters game. And it's really simple, and I kind of cribbed it from the classic Ghostbusters International version. But what you do is that whenever a character is making a roll, you pay attention to what their wild die is. Whenever they roll a 1 on the wild die, something weird happens.
The ghost die.
Exactly. It's the same thing as the ghost die mechanic, where there's a 1 in 6 chance in every roll that something's going to happen. If they fail, well, they fail big, or they fail funny. If they succeed, then they succeed really, really well, almost too well, embarrassingly well. That leads to more complications. The key to that is keeping it lighthearted, not be cruel or mean about it. And the other one is, as well, is institute the critical failures rule, where you're not allowed to Benny critical fails. If you roll double 1s, you can't spend Bennies on it. You're stuck with that result. So now you have the worst effect of not only did I fail, not only is it something horrible going to happen to me because I rolled double 1s, but I can't do anything about it, and you're stuck with it. Comedy comes from a character being weak as opposed to being from a place of strength. You know, a character who's strong all the time can't really be funny because a lot of comedy comes from taking down people who are more powerful than you are. When you're already powerful, there's nobody for you to attack. So moments of weakness, moments of points where your characters aren't in control or don't have full say in their fate, that's where humor comes from. So, yeah, so you definitely, it's whenever they have failures, you want to make those failures a little more lighthearted, a little more crazy or wacky whenever you can manage it.
And also talking that ghost die reminds, it's part of the mechanics now that's in the new Paranoia thing. And one of the things that they taught me in there is don't kill the characters, leave them actually wanting to be killed as you just pile more and more complications. And
Exactly.
You just pile it on there and have them torn apart, but you refuse to give them the mercy of letting up. Is that applied? Can that be applied to Savage Worlds too?
I think so. I think it's a little bit tougher to do in Savage Worlds, largely because damage can be so unforgiving and pretty brutal. I mean, in a lot of cases, if the hit's bad enough, you probably won't walk away. You're probably not going to be able to get out of it. I've had very, very extraordinarily few characters go to the injury table. Either they survive with no harm in them at all, or they're completely blown away. It's just the way the probability works out. It's very unusual for them to have any long-lasting injuries. But the injury table itself can be kind of brutal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would use the injury table in a comedy game. That'd be something else I would kind of throw out. There are a couple other variants where, if I remember right, I want to say was it Low Life? I don't remember. There's an alternate damage table in one of the settings. I think it might have been Pirates of the Spanish Main, where characters couldn't actually die. Oh no, I'm thinking of the superhero rules, where when a character is incapacitated, they're knocked unconscious.
Right.
And that's it. Or something like Slipstream too is it as well, where when a character is injured that badly, they're simply knocked unconscious for X number of hours, and then they wake up and they've got a headache and they may still have some of the wounds left or fatigue, but they're not completely wasted.
I'm thinking the injury table. I'm thinking, of course, to the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which would be a fun thing to whip once on a player.
True. I'm not dead yet. I will have one thing I have to say now that you've mentioned Monty Python, is that I have specifically disallowed my players from quoting Monty Python at the table. In my opinion, unless you're a member of Monty Python, you're not that funny.
Mm-hmm.
Let the professionals do that. And also, that forces them to think of more funny material, more original material that's probably more setting, genre, and activity appropriate. When you restrict it that way and say, I don't want to hear people making just straight quotes and lines right out of it, because some groups, that's all they'll do all night long. They'll spend 4 hours doing nothing but reciting the entirety of Holy Grail. Let's try to avoid that. You know, we're better than that. We can do better.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think my wife's got me watching Supernatural, and they pace up before they go into the serious, hardcore, to be continued episodes with some lighter episodes. And even X-Files did that, where it's the monster who's the freak who is loves kitties and stuff, and just
Right.
is petting a kitty while everybody is thinking he's a horrible beast.
Mhm.
How do you put that kind of episode, little module, into your campaign without completely trashing the feel of the campaign? How do you make it feel still X-Files, Supernatural, and not like you've suddenly gone Saturday Night Live?
The trick with that comes into pacing, because what you want to do with that is that you want to have that break to happen before a large plot point occurs. So the idea is that the thread of your plot is going to be continuing to climb up with growing tension and growing concern. Then you want to release that just a little bit to get them ready for the next stage, which will take them up to a much higher level of story. So you just want to have that little break. If you pay attention, and Supernatural is a good example, but if you look at the way that the scheduling works with those shows, you'll always see that those lighthearted episodes happen just before major plot episodes, because they've had that rising tension, and they're gonna break it back. They're gonna pull it back just a little bit before they hit you with the really big thing, because that kind of lulls you into a false sense of security, and also makes the next episode hit that much harder. Also, it's also no surprise that those happen during sweeps weeks too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
the couple of weeks before sweeps, you always get that more sort of off-kilter, sort of oddball episode, and then the next one is the really big, deep, involved one. You see that with shows all the time.
Yeah, and it's a screenwriting technique too. Things, and you can't go bam, bam, bam with an audience all the way through. You have to pull back to let the audience breathe and be able to take it to that level. Same, I guess, with gamers on that.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend everybody read Hamlet's Hit Points by Robin D. Laws. It's a fantastic book. It really goes into a lot of detail about how pacing works, the different kind of story beats you can introduce, how you can structure those together. It's a really, really great book. It's a little bit more advanced for if you're a starting GM. You might want to put that on the shelf for a little bit while later. Make sure you read his Laws of Good Game Mastering first, because that's your GM 101 book. This is more of a GM 301 style text. It's a little bit more of an advanced class.
Okay, so let's hear a good story. What was one of your best comedy module sessions that you ran?
Oh wow, that's a good one. That's a really good question. I'm trying to think. It's funny because almost all of my sessions involve some level of comedy in one form or another, and it's hard to say because a lot of the stuff is you kind of had to be there. You really kind of had to be there, and the ones you don't have to be there for, I can't say on a family podcast.
That's good. That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's good stories from the ETU? How is your ETU campaign going? I mean, how did you get it established? What are some good points for GMs who are establishing this campaign and to getting it where it works and it clicks?
It's been we're about 3 sessions in. We've had a couple of little scheduling things, but we've had a couple of good sessions under our belts. And I think that the players seem to be really enjoying themselves. It's definitely a setting that everybody is really connecting with. They're really connecting with the characters. They're playing off each other very well. Everybody in the group has had experiences has been in colleges, and they've had experiences very similar to these kids. So it's definitely something they can very well relate to. Oh, excuse me. One moment. Sorry, I didn't want to burp on camera. So we've had it was a little bit of a challenge though, because we have such a wide variety of characters, and trying to get a way to get them to connect and try and figure out how they're going to interact with one another has been a little bit tricky. So I've kind of playing it more in a sandbox style. So what I did was, and we talked about this a little bit last time, is I put together the spreadsheet of all of the Savage Tales and plot points that are available for ETU.
And that was shared on misdirectedmark.com. They can find in the show notes the link for that.
Yep. And so what I did was I filtered that by their level. They're all still freshmen. And then I just read through the list and decided to pick each Savage Tale that I thought would be effective for one of the characters. So I said, okay, well, this one involves, an example of one of the things that's happening now is that one of the Savage Tales involves a girl who picks up a stalker who happens to be able to, spoiler alert, be able to control insects. So, okay, all right, well, one of the player characters has an annoying roommate that's always getting into trouble and has an unknown phobia. So I put two and two together and went, I wonder what would happen if Share happened to be bugs. And this thing happened to her. She had a boyfriend killed by a bunch of bees. And I thought that would be an interesting way of doing it. And then we would introduce each one of those on the first session, the first open session where, well, it was the second game session, but the first session where they had a lot of chance to take their own initiative. I would introduce each one of them to their little Savage Tale piece. So, these couple of girls over here are also roommates of the same girl. They share a suite together, so they interact with her on meeting this weird guy. And then I have another guy who's in a class by himself. He's got an English teacher. Oh, his English teacher is a real jerk, and somebody else in the class doesn't like him a whole lot. We have other people who are more involved with something that might have to do with the more long-term parts of the campaign that I can't talk about too much because one of my players is sitting over here right behind me.
How in that kind of situation do you make it where all the players and have their characters to be involved with everything, so it's not everybody doing their own thing on that kind of scenario?
It's been really tricky, but the advantage with ETU is that there's a couple of very strong NPCs that are used to drive the plot forward, and in this case, it's an NPC called Professor McClanahan, who's a professor of anthropology, but also has an interest in the occult. They encounter him on the first night. They've talked to him a couple of times. One of the students happens to be in the archaeology department or anthropology department, and so there's an excuse for them to talk to him. And once he realizes that they're able to do these things and have an effect, he's going to notice. And then he becomes the Gandalf to their fellowship, way of speaking, saying, hey, I happen to be looking for an investigative team to help me do something involving a seance in this old broken-down house. Wouldn't you like to come help me? And
sure.
And if they're good players, they say yes. And if they're bad players, they say no. And then I kick them out of my group.
Cool. And today, as we're recording this, we saw a nice little thing pop up about on the Pinnacle Facebook group and on their website about Lankhmar. What do we know about this? And should we be excited about it?
You should be very excited about this. I'm very excited about this. I'm a big Lankhmar fan from way back in the day. I think we may have talked about this too in the past. Did we cover Lankhmar and its history and stuff before?
We talked a little bit. We mostly talked about it at I think Queen City. We talked mostly about it.
Okay.
Because you kind of knew it was coming.
Yes. So Lankhmar, the City of Adventure, or other epithets that it's had in the past. It was the setting for a series of books written by an author named Fritz Lieber, who was from the classic age of the sword and sorcery epoch, way back when, in the 1940s and 1950s. And it involves a pair of characters known as Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. And Fafhrd's a great, huge, tall, hulking barbarian, and the Grey Mouser is this little short, very thin and wiry swordsman, duelist style character. And the two of them are best friends, and they go on adventures together. It's a great setup for adventure. It really is a great setup for a bunch of stories.
Is that where Inigo Montoya came from this setup with
Not so much.
That pairing with him and the giant?
No, what it is that I never really thought of that, but it's very much possible. I don't know if that's for sure. I think Inigo Montoya, and well, certainly the Dread Pirate Ra, which is more sort of a throwback to the Zorro Age, and Errol Flynn, but they're sort of from the same genetic makeup, because the author Fritz Lieber was a competitive fencer in his spare time. It was one of his many careers. His father was also an actor, but he was really interested in swordplay. He was really interested in all those styles of martial arts, and he really brought that to the stories and brought that to the characters. It was originally written as a collection of short stories, and they were released as novels throughout the course of his life. He wrote about 6 novels together, the Swords series. And each one of them is a collection of stories of things that happened to Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser in this place called Lankhmar. And if you read through it, it very much feels like an old-style D&D game, where the characters go to all these sort of strange lands. They go to meet all these unusual people. They run afoul of a bunch of wizards and all sorts of excitement happens to them. I mean, it really is really great stuff. I highly recommend that if anybody's interested in that classic sword sorcery style, definitely go check them out. Keep in mind that we're written at a different time, so there are some things in there that are not exactly politically correct. But if you're familiar and comfortable with the likes of Conan the Barbarian or any of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff, I don't think you're going to have a problem with it. And there are definitely like more horror style elements to the Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories. So there are those little bits of kind of Cthulhu style creatures that are running around there. Now, since this is all such a great setting for adventure and excitement and the sword and sorcery style, it's no wonder that there's been several different versions of Lankhmar published for a number of different game settings. And TSR did one way back in the day, back in the mid-'80s, and there were a few other supplements released after that. Now we find out that there's going to be one done for Savage Worlds, which is due for release sometime soon. I believe later this year is what they're planning for. And they've just started to kind of filter out some of the information about that now. The first thing that they've talked about is one of the setting rules that's going to be available in it, which is really kind of cool. I think it's really a nifty one. Basically, what it is that a lot of the characters in the Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories are, well, to want a better word, they're thieves. And so the ideas of, or the themes of, honor and betrayal are very, very important in this setting. So that's why we introduced the setting rule: no honor among thieves. When a player character or another trusted ally decides to betray one of the player characters, that player character may not spend any bennies on the result. He's stuck with whatever he rolls.
The betrayer or the betrayee?
The betrayee.
Ah.
Yeah. So what happens is that if let's say that my character and your character were adventuring together, and I decided to betray you, whatever I decided to do to you, you can't roll to resist, or you have less of a chance of resisting. So
I can't find my way out of it.
Exactly. Because the idea is that I'm so clever and I'm so sneaky that there's no possible way you would have figured out what I was up to. Otherwise, you just spend the betting. No, that doesn't really happen, and that's not as much fun.
No.
But yeah, but like, let's say if I decide to stab you in the back, you can't soak the damage because you can't spend bunnies on the result. So you're stuck with whatever I roll. So I'm really interested to see how that plays with the rest of the setting. I'm definitely one of the things this is definitely something I'm really looking forward to. I've been a huge Fritz Leiber fan forever, so it's really very excited about this one.
Cool. So we will keep an eye out for that. My other question for you, Tim, comes from my gaming table. We had, again, we talked last time about the use of cards in there, and here's a great example of how that could definitely affect things. There's one card in there called Uh-Oh, where the size of the creature that they're facing...
Oh, I am so familiar with Uh-Oh.
...becomes 2 sizes higher. So they played this on, basically, in Deadlands Noir, found a Jurassic Park being built by some voodoo people, and turned the T-Rex 2 sizes bigger from a T-Rex. Then the guy who's the boxer who wouldn't take a fall, who has put a lot of edges into his fighting, managed to hit really well, roll very well on his damage, getting like a 26, and my wife had the card for making that do double damage. So next thing we know, 52 points of damage. I can't soak that, and we have a boxer one punch out a T-Rex. How do you handle that in setting? That is something so broken. Bizarre. How do you roll with it, and how do you even justify where players are like, that can't actually happen, right?
No, it's not. Well, the thing to remember is that Savage Worlds is designed for those sorts of events to occur. When you've got exploding dice that are open-ended, and there's no telling how high you're going to roll, every once in a while you're going to open that die, roll a dozen times, half a dozen times. It's happened to be many times, like I said, it just happened to you as well. There's no way to get around it. It's going to happen. You just have to be prepared for it. So what do you do in those situations? Well, let them have their moment in the sun. Let them have their fun. I mean, you're the game master. You can make anything happen. you have an entire world full of people that are gunning for this guy now. So there's nothing you can do there's nothing you can't do after that point. You can throw anything you want at him. Because after all, he's the guy who took out a dinosaur with one punch. What do you mean you can't possibly turn this down? Your reputation's on the line now.
Not worried about talking it down, but actually players looking like this can't actually happen, even in the setting. This has gone beyond the setting to where everything is broken. How do you sell it?
Oh, well, I think at that point, if you have a player who's having that reaction, that's time to have a conversation about the setting, about the game rules, and what kind of reality to expect. The game supports it. The game says this is absolutely a thing that can happen. This is something that can totally happen in a setting. Is you can roll that much, do so much damage that the guy will never get away from it. Keep in mind, though, there are some little flukes in the system that will help you get around that. For example, even though you've done that much damage, you still have the incapacitation table coming. I'm presuming this is a mook, right?
The T-Rex?
Yeah.
No, the T-Rex was a wild card.
It was a wild card. Okay. So once the damage is calculated, once you figure out how many wounds are actually coming through, don't bother rolling the soak roll. He's not going to be able to soak it. Save your bennies and roll the incapacitation table. Yeah, he'll be knocked out, but he'll be knocked out. There's a chance he might be coming back. So one of the things you can look for is that there are ways you can bring that character back in. And sometimes that can really work out to your advantage. As one example I have is I was running a fantasy game once, and I was running it using a scenario that used to be on the Pinnacle site called Against the Orcs. And at the end of this small dungeon crawl, they encounter the Orc Warlord, a big Orc chieftain kind of guy, and he had done a ton of damage to the rest of the group. There were 3 players. One guy had been knocked unconscious. One guy had been knocked down 3 wounds. There was just one ranger character left, and he had a couple of wounds on him. He was in no good shape. He rolled the dice. He open-ended a couple times, and he got a great shot off and did a ton of damage to the guy. So I'm like, okay, cool. He kills the guy. That's one orc. There's whole legions of orcs out there. Pick another one. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you have to throw your whole plans out, and it doesn't matter that it has to be ridiculous. You want to make that seem like a really great heroic moment. Take a moment, pause the action for a minute, and get yourself a really good description. Describe exactly how he lifts that bow in slow motion. He draws draws it back just to the point, takes a deep breath and holds it before he lets it fly, and arcs cleanly through the air and pierces the orc straight through his right eye socket.
Yeah. That's one thing I've been doing for all the session, not just Savage Worlds lately, is whenever anybody does damage to kill somebody, I don't narrate it. I tell them, so tell me what happens.
Yes. I found and that can kind of backfire a little bit because I've seen some people just completely freeze at that point. They're so used to the game master saying, well, here's what happens, that they don't know how to react when you suddenly put it in their hands. But that is exactly a great thing you can do, is give them a chance to take over the narrations. Tell me, how does it happen? What do you want this scene to look like? How do you want it to play out? And don't worry about the rules at that moment. We've already established this guy's going down. All you got to do is describe how cool it looks.
Which is a very cool thing. And the player who actually did that, I think he wasn't as much surprised about the rule thing, but more surprised that I was going to let him, because this was the first punch of the encounter, where it's literally like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Guy comes out with the samurai sword and he pulls out the gun and shoots him down. That's what it is, but with a T-Rex instead of a dude with the samurai sword. Yeah, sure. And he felt very badass that, yes, that stands. That's what happens.
Yeah. And then, forever after, he becomes the guy who felled a mighty dinosaur with one blow! My power fist! And
I asked the players to get their XP by writing journal entries. One player turned in a drawing of that scene.
Nice!
Of the guy with a cartoon of the boxer one punching out a T-Rex.
That's fantastic.
And that's something he will be bragging about for a while.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Tim, for joining us tonight.
No problem.
And we will see you at the gaming table.
All right, take care, Garrett. We'll talk to you later.